U.S. forces arriving in CENTCOM waters near Iran yesterday, holding multi-day military exercises, should the White House decide to strike Tehran over the regime's deadly crackdown on civilian protesters. The president telling Axios, quote, "We have a big armada next to Iran, bigger than Venezuela. They want to make a deal. I know so. They called on numerous occasions. They want to talk." Now, Iranian terror proxies in Yemen and Iraq are threatening an attack on American forces in the area. Joining me now, Heritage Foundation Vice President of National Security and former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, Victoria Coates. Victoria, good morning. There's some new reporting this morning I wanted to ask you about. Basically, that Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the UAE are telling the United States that we cannot use their airspace if we do decide to do any type of attack on Iran. Can you explain that to us?
Well, good morning, Cheryl. Good to be with you. Yes, I mean, this is pretty standard for the region. The Gulf powers will all say you can't use our airspace, you can't use your assets in our countries, and then we do. In the event the president wants to take an action against Iran. So, as I said, that's pretty much theater. They do it for face-saving reasons. That's fine. But the reality of the situation is the president has moved remarkable assets into the region. And it's really quite a demonstration of our ability to project power. Because bear in mind, a month ago, these types of assets were all concentrated in the Caribbean in the run-up to the action against Nicolas Maduro and Venezuela. Now we're halfway around the world. We're prepared to do whatever the commander-in-chief might order. So we'll see what he decides to do going forward. But I do think the reporting on the number of casualties in Iran on the 8th and 9th of January, when more than 10,000 people, it appears, were killed, that may be the decisive point here.
Yeah, I want you to listen to retired General Jack Keane. He was on the program with me yesterday. And my question to him from a military perspective was how would this take place if the United States takes action against Iran? Listen to what Jack Keane told me yesterday.
I think what this is really about is, one, is holding the regime accountable, as you indicated, for the thousands that have been killed. And also the tens of thousands that have been in prison. And the president said he would do just that. And I think it's also about trying to cut off the head of the snake here. In other words, the regime is the snake, and we're trying to get the leaders out of there so some kind of transition can take place. Just the threat of this happening has to be weakening the resolve of the leaders around the Ayatollah. They are weak politically, economically, and militarily, and really on the cusp of not being even able to recover any of this because of the economic situation in such poor shape militarily.
Victoria, Iran is destabilized.
No, it is. And I mean, Cheryl, their central bank printed 2 quadrillion rial earlier this week to try to stabilize their economic situation. Quadrillion with a Q. And so if you're printing that much money, it means you can't solve your economic problems. They're in a death spiral. And that's what's different this time. I completely agree with General Keane. I mean, this isn't a single incident that's prompting the protests and the unrest in Iran. This is a systemic economic failure. And it's ridiculous. I mean, bear in mind, they have the second largest proven oil reserves in the world. And this is what's happening to them. That's how bad the mismanagement is. That's what the Iranian people are completely fed up with. So we'll see. I mean, the president has lots of options on the table. This isn't an invasion like Iraq or Afghanistan. This could be a very targeted strike on leadership or on infrastructure that would push the situation over the edge.
Yeah, that's why we see the reports that Khomeini is now back in his bunker. He's aware of that. I want to move on to this from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He's going to testify on Capitol Hill today over the Trump administration's actions in Venezuela and the capture of Maduro. Now, the White House is considering a naval blockade on Cuba to stop oil imports into that country. President Trump commented on this when he was in Iowa yesterday. Watch this.
We're going to see what happens with Cuba. I don't know, anybody interested in Cuba in this room? Not too many people. This is not a Cuba room, but that's all right. There are plenty of them around, especially in Miami. And Cuba will be failing. Cuba is really a nation that's very close to failing. You know, they got their money from Venezuela. They got the oil from Venezuela. They're not getting that anymore.
Victoria, your thoughts on what we're going to hear from the Secretary of State today?
Well, obviously, this is a subject that's very close to Secretary Rubio's heart. His parents came from Cuba, and so he's been watching the island very carefully. Bear in mind, it's only 90 miles off the shores of Florida, so this is a much more proximate threat to the United States. It's been a deadly enemy of the United States for more than 60 years. It would be great to see positive change in Cuba, and I think that we could see that through economic means, through this oil embargo. They're also out of money, and they're out of fuel, and so we'll see what happens. But the good thing, and that I think this is what the president was talking about, is we have the extraordinary diaspora in the United States, starting with the Secretary of State, who are prepared to help Cuba in a very positive transition to become a friend of the United States.
Well, I was in Cuba a decade ago, and the new cars that you see were all Chinese and Russian. And so I think that there's a very good argument to be made. So we'll see what the Secretary of State says today when he testifies. It's going to be very interesting. Before you go, I want to ask you about what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. So the United States has reportedly told Ukraine they have to sign a peace deal with Russia to get those American security guarantees, and that would require giving up the Donbass region. What do you make of this?
Well, this is always going to be the hardest point, is what is the eastern border of Ukraine going to look like? Well, how are we going to draw those lines? And one thing, Cheryl, that's really important everybody remember is what we get to now does not necessarily have to be permanent. You know, this is something that maybe Ukraine can accept for the time being. You can then go back and renegotiate later on. There can be additional means of adjusting this. But I think getting to a conclusion of this grinding fighting is what the president wants to see, and then moving on with Ukraine, figuring out how to look at their air defense, their border security, so that this can hold, and then rebuilding the country. And so hopefully we can get there. We had the first trilateral talks with Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. That is a really good sign, and hopefully we can build on it.
Well, yeah, the president mentioned this yesterday. He said he really hopes that the end of the war is near. Victoria Coates, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Cheryl.
All right, Victoria Coates.